Hey everyone, just wanted to give a quick warning. This story talks about child abuse, it touches on suicide, and there's other violence and some vulgar language, so I just want to give people the opportunity to back out if this is not what they want to hear. But anyway, hope you enjoy part 1. A melancholy recollection of traumatic events. I hate bullies. Bullies have set the course of my fairly chaotic life since day one. My father was a bully. My mother wasn't much better, if I'm being honest. My parents were very religious, and I don't mean just go to church every Sunday, but they were crazy religious. I was little less than a demon, haunting their precious household in my father's eyes. They never wanted children. They were never shy about sharing that little fact. I have no doubt that if it wasn't for their devotion to their faith, they would have aborted me before I ever had a shot at life. I spent a lot of time in my youth wishing just for that. My father was also a drinker. Seems he would pick and choose which of his God's lessons he would obey or dismiss. He would drink and get pissed at this shit or that and take every bit of it out on me. He would beat and belittle me for anything that struck his fancy. My mother would, for the most part, turn a blind eye to my suffering. Hell, she would join in on the day's session of mockery and finger-pointing when she felt the need. Regardless of how much they regretted my birth, they loved each other dearly. To the neighbors and friends of the family and such, theirs was a romance to be envied. Some would tell them how much they wished they could find something special, like what they had. This would genuinely make me queasy. I hated them both with a passion. They had never shown me anything but pain and anguish, but I knew that if I exposed the truth of our happy little family, my life would become an even bigger hell than it already was. So, I remained quiet when they would explain to the neighbors and teachers today's excuse for my bruises and cuts. Though, my father always tried his best to make sure the wounds were hidden. Rarely did he hit me in the face, unless his aim was completely fucked from his inebriation. Oh yeah, life was rough for little Michael Borden. That would be me, by the way. My apologies. I completely forgot to introduce myself. The only time I ever saw any sort of affection was if we were around others. They would quickly send me away to play when folks would come over, though. Like I had anything to play with. Enough hand-me-down flea market shit to save face should anyone happen to see my bedroom, but most of it was likely to give me tetanus than a good time. When my mother became pregnant again, my father did not pull his punches. I was kept out of school sick for the next 2 weeks until my face was fit to be seen in public. They could not stand to even look at me, almost as if they blamed me for their dear old dad forgot to fucking pull out. I was 5 at the time, 5 years old, and a little less than pure evil in my folks' eyes. The next 6 months were complete hell. I won't get into details, but I missed a lot of school over those months. My mother went into premature labor at 6.5 months, and my little brother was born weighing only 4 pounds. My mother did not survive the labor. When my father arrived home, he actually grabbed me and pulled me into the only hug I would ever receive from him. He held me close and sobbed and wailed. I actually felt shell-shocked, both at a loss of my mother, as awful a human being as she was, and at the sudden affection from my father. I cried with him. We held each other and cried until our eyes hurt. After what felt like hours, he backed up from me, still holding me by the shoulders. He just looked at me. I'd never seen the expression on his face before. He looked broken, but somehow kind. We stared at each other for quite some time. It actually caught me off guard when his expression changed from apathy to rage. Rage at me. It was as if he thought I had somehow seduced him into the brief moment of bonding. I winced as his grip tightened on my shoulders. I tried to pull back and get free from his grasp, but at my first effort he picked me up and threw me against the wall. I knew something was broken, but I was in too much shock to figure out what. He screamed a mess of words I could not make out intermingled with Bible verses. It was as if he was trying to exorcise the demon he saw in me from his house. He grabbed me by my collar and started dragging me up the stairs. I was in so much agony and shock, I could barely form words myself, but I begged him as much as I could to let me go. We got into the bedroom and he dropped me to the floor. I tried to get up to run away, but I couldn't move my legs. I didn't know if it was the shock of everything or that I was seriously messed up. I wasn't any more well-versed in physical ailments than the ones I had experienced in my few years of life. I started to drag myself out of the room as my father opened my bedroom window. He grabbed me again and started dragging me to the window. "No, Daddy, let me go," I screamed, though it hurt like hell. "Want me to let you go? Okay, you little shit. Got your fucking wish." I don't remember anything after going out the window. I'm not sure if the impact knocked me out or I passed out before I hit. Apparently 3 weeks had gone by when I awakened in a hospital bed. My left arm and leg were broken and my back had undergone some significant damage. Fortunately, I was going to be in the hospital for quite some time. My memories of what happened were shaky at best. My father told the police and the hospital staff that I had left from the window out of despair over my mother's death. I was assigned a counselor in addition to my physical therapy crew. Apparently, my little brother was still in the hospital as well, due to underdevelopment from being so premature. He was still in an incubator, grasping onto life more so than myself. Thankfully, he would be kept away from my father for the time being. The thought of a newborn going to the house from hell scared me even more than my own eventual return. Over the following months, after my back and limbs had recovered enough, I went through daily physical therapy. It didn't take me long to be able to walk again, though not particularly well. I also have been getting counseling twice a week. I tried to explain the truth to my therapist, but he chalked it up to memories altered by the trauma of attempting suicide, especially at such a young age. My father, after all, was a very respected individual in a small town. Nobody would believe anything negative about him. Between losing my mother and having a complete nervous breakdown, I was hard-pressed to find anyone who would listen. I was able to visit my little brother regularly. He was such a tiny little guy, but I loved him from the first second. When he was finally allowed to leave the incubator, I got to spend some time playing with him before he was to be sent home. Fortunately, my aunt was going to take him in for a while, until my father was up to the task of caring for an infant. That would never be, in my opinion, but I knew it would happen eventually. I hadn't spent much time with my aunt over the years, but she had always seemed a kind sort. Of course, so did my parents to the rest of the world. She was my mother's older sister. She lived in another state, but was renting an apartment nearby to be able to be close to the family. She was still mourning her sister, and it seemed to do her good to be around her new nephew. She would even bring him by the hospital every couple of days to see me. After 6 weeks of recovery, I was ready to leave the hospital. My father showed up with my aunt and little brother, who had since been named Tommy after my grandfather on my mother's side. Dear old Daddy had been signed off by his grievance counselor to be fit to care for his children, and had claimed he had worked on my bedroom to make it fit for two. I would soon see just that he replaced my bed with bunk beds. My aunt said her teary goodbyes at the hospital and headed on her way back to her home. We would not see her again for many years. As soon as Father of the Year pulled his truck off the hospital parking lot, he wasted no time in letting us know he was still the same ignorant bastard that had put me in the hospital in the first place. He spilled the gospel and plenty of curses all the way back home. He bitched about the hospital bills and blamed us for every wrong this world had to offer. I was to be homeschooled from now until the foreseeable future, so I would be able to help take care of my brother. This pretty much translated to, I would be raising my brother while he drank himself to sleep every night after working all day while we made do at home by ourselves. Honestly, I was okay with it. I actually had a companion for the first time in my life. The next few years years went by fairly quickly, it seemed. I was 10 years old now, and Tommy was 5. We were best friends and did just about everything together. Yeah, there had still been plenty of beatings and lectures over time. Tommy had, unfortunately, gained a few scars of his own. We would compare from time to time. Tally who got the worst of it and all. My father decided it was time to send us back to physical school. Basically, it boiled down to he had changed shifts at his job. He had been promoted to the night shift manager and did not want to be stuck alone with us during the day. Time passed by some more. My brother was small for his age, even at 12 years old now. He looked about 9 at most. Being 5 grades below me, I wasn't always able to be there to watch out for him when the bullies would swarm, and boy would they swarm. Since we had started school years before, I had joined every athletic class I was able to, someday, show my father a thing or two, should the opportunity arise. I was in pretty solid physical shape by this point, and my father would barely even speak to me anymore. At times he tried to lay into Tommy, but if I was near, it wouldn't take much to get him to back down. Though I couldn't always be around. I hated to think what my father put him through when they were alone together. He was in his 50s now, and years of drinking and not taking any sort of care for himself had left him far from the intimidating specimen from my youth. I had plans to move out when I turned 18 and take Tommy with me. I was the closest thing he had to a dad, and I would be damned if I was going to leave him home without me there to look out for him. About a month before my 18th birthday, my life once more took a turn for the worse. I got called to the nurse's office at school to come and get my brother. Poor kid was bloody and bruised and sitting outside the nurse's office hanging his head. He had been patched up, but he was a mess. I asked the nurse what had happened, and she explained that 3 bigger kids took turns laying into Tommy. He refused to give up the Casio digital watch I had given him for his birthday. He was still wearing it, though they had smashed its face. I wanted to beat the shit out of those little bastards, but they were currently residing in the principal's office. I took Tommy home to my father's dismay. He had the day off and did not want to bother with his demon spawn. I waved my hand in the best fuck off dad way I could and took Tommy up to the bedroom. I made him some sandwiches and let him play with my Game Boy. I told him I'd be back in a little while. Just lock the door and stay away from dad. Even though I wasn't quite 18 yet, I wasn't intending to actually fight the bullying little shits, but I was sure going to scare the hell out of them. I parked outside the school and waited for them to leave. After a while, they came strolling out, laughing their heads off, apparently quite proud of the mess they had made out of my brother's face. Okay, maybe I will do a little more than just scare them. I followed them off of school property into the woods and ran up behind them and pushed them on the ground. Though I was boiling over with rage, I managed to not actually strike any of them, but I did pick up the bigger one of them and push him against the nearest tree. I pulled out my pocket knife and held it to his throat. I made it clear to them that Tommy was never to be touched, mocked, or even approached by them again. Given the pool of urine that flowed from his pant legs, I think I got my point across. As soon as I arrived back home, I went to check on Tommy to find my father laying into him, the door open, having been knocked off its hinges. You're just as fucking weak. No, you're fucking more weak than your piece of shit brother when he was your age. He was screaming at him and slapping his face. I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him away from my brother. Don't you ever fucking touch him again, I yelled as I slammed him against the wall. Tommy was screaming, crying. Blood streamed down his face, along with the tears. He ran down the stairs and out into the yard. I dropped my father and chased after him. I got out of the front door to find him standing next to the road. Tommy, come back, kiddo. I ain't gonna let him hurt you anymore, I pleaded, holding my arms out. My father charged out behind me and pushed me out of the way. Go on, keep going. You ain't wanted here no more, he said, almost matter-of-factly, just a little louder than a whisper so none of the neighbors who had walked out of their doors to see the commotion would hear his words. Cars were whipping by the house. We lived just off the main road, so many were not even paying attention as they drove by. I gathered myself back up and started to head towards my sobbing little brother. My father, of course, was still staring knives at the poor kid while spilling tears from his lips. I was about halfway across the lawn trying to talk him into coming away from the road when his tears just stopped. He looked up at me, eyes red and puffy, and calmly said, "I love you, big brother," before stepping backwards into the road just in time to meet a fairly large pickup truck. The driver slammed on his brakes, but that only served to drag poor Tommy, who had instantly wedged under the grill of the truck. The truck then blew a tire and flipped onto its side, dragging the ground for a good 20 feet before coming to a halt. Everything became foggy. I ran to the road to my dear brother's body. There wasn't much left of him, but I grabbed him and pulled him towards me. I was wailing and crying. This couldn't be happening. He was a happy kid for the most part. My thoughts were erratic. I just knew my father was to blame. What was he saying to him when I wasn't around? He came strolling up behind me, almost nonchalantly. "He shouldn't have been pulling so close to the road," he shrugged. What happened next is still something of a blur to me. I charged him, pushed him down to the road, and started punching him as hard as I could. Neighbors ran up and tried to pull me off, but there was no stopping me. I kept punching and punching until I just physically couldn't anymore, though I still tried. Blood splattered me in the face with every swing. I was yelling and cursing and screaming out in all the pain he had caused through my life, and then something hit me across the head and everything went dark. It seems what struck me and left me unconscious was a police officer's club. I was so blind to everything else around me at the time, I didn't even see the blue lights approaching. My father was dead. Dead quite literally by my hands. The trial was short. As I was so close to my 18th birthday, I was tried as an adult. As many witnesses as there were, it was pretty cut and dry. The judge did take a little leniency on me, as I just witnessed my brother commit very brutal suicide. I was sentenced to 10 years without the possibility of parole. Strangely, it wasn't hard to adjust to prison life. It wasn't overly different from my home life since birth. Guards pushed us around and took great pleasure in talking as much shit as they could to a daddy killer such as myself. Though I had continued to work out every chance I got and had become quite of the intimidating stature, I kept my head down and did my time in silence for the most part. For the first 2 years, I actually had a cell to myself. It was quite nice, if I'm being honest. I had never been an especially social person. I didn't mess with anyone, and nobody messed with me. Well, after my first week when I put 2 shit-talking inmates in stitches after they tried to force me into, well, activities I had no interest in, I spent the next week in the hole, which was ironic considering where on my body my attackers were hoping to spend a little more time. 2 years in, I got my first cellmate. I wasn't happy about this at first. He was a skinny kid, long, stringy blonde hair, probably weighed about $1.15, soaking wet. Looked like he'd seen the wrong end of some hard drugs in his time. I say kid, but he was only a year or 2 younger than me. He looked a lot younger, or I felt a lot older anyway. He actually turned out to be a hell of a good guy, and we would go on to become very close. Truthfully, he was probably the only real friend I'd ever had, aside from my little brother. He was actually a real-life English kid. His name was Grant Bailey, from a little town in Liverpool that I can't recall the name of for the life of me. He told me about life across the pond and how he managed to end up arrested only 3 months after getting his American citizenship. I asked him several times over the years what he was arrested for. He would always just smile and say, "That's a conversation for another time, mate." I just assumed it was drug-related given his demeanor when he first arrived, and the following month or so of detox he seemed to go through. Maybe something else embarrassing that he just didn't want to talk about. Either way, I'd still keep asking every couple of months or so, and he'd keep giving me the same answer. It almost became a ritual over time. Being both scrawny and foreign, he would have fellow prisoners try to push him around from time to time. But I was no stranger to stepping in to try and protect someone. It actually felt nice to have someone under my wing again. He could be cocky as hell, though, so he would bring a lot of it on himself. In the end, that would just lead to a lot of laughs between us. He knew I had his back, and he would get a little overly confident in that. I did, one time, let a fairly hefty skinhead asshole take one good swing at him after he fucked with him about being a Nazi prick. Not at all did I support said Nazi prick, but I thought one good jab would show him there's just some folks you shouldn't fuck with. After said jab caught him across the jaw and landed him on the floor, I knelt down beside him and clapped him on the shoulder. "I'll take it from here, bud," I said right before I took it upon myself to break the Nazi's nose. He was apparently pretty high-ranking among the white supremacists of our particular prison, so this could have gone very badly for me and Grant. As it turns out, it went better than expected. We had, or I had, gained the respect of this sect of awful fucking human beings. I guess better respect than the hatred they're known for. I wouldn't let Grant too far out of my sight when they were around still. Just to be safe, I suggested to Grant that he consider trying to put on some muscle. He looked too much of an easy target. Plus, I couldn't promise I'd always be around to have his back. He reluctantly agreed. He had little interest in working out, but he was deceptively strong for his size. 5 years later, Grant's sentence had come to a close. He was pushing about 170 pounds now and looked a million times healthier than he did when he arrived. He still sported the long hair, but it was a lot cleaner and no longer stringy. I hated to see him go. He had become my best friend, my only friend for that matter. Yeah, I had plenty of respect from a lot of the inmates, but Grant was the only one I'd call a friend. He told me to hold on to the remaining stash of cigarettes we had gathered over the years and said he'd be in touch soon. I would hold him to his word on it too. I still had 3 years left on my sentence, but my court-appointed lawyer seemed confident he could get it down to 1. In all honesty, I didn't really care. Aside from being separated now from my only friend, prison wasn't easy by any means, but it was leagues better than my old home. As it turned out, my lawyer was close to correct. I was given a chance at parole the very next year. I was released after serving 8 years of my 10-year sentence. Grant, who was true to his word, had stayed in touch and visited regularly over my last year. He even found a job and had sung my praises to the hiring staff. I had my own interview the next week. It wasn't the best job by any means. Orchard Industries was one of the country's largest carpet manufacturers, but it was never a job you dreamed of getting one day. It paid well and the work wasn't hard, so I couldn't complain there. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Of course, our direct manager was about as big of a tool as you'd expect. He was in his mid-40s, had a terrible comb-over and a ratty beard. He wasn't especially big or small, just sort of one of those people you'd never really even notice outside of a work environment. He had obvious self-esteem issues and made sure to swing his dick around like he stood for something on a daily basis. He was a company man through and through, and we were beneath him. He made that clear. Given our shared living circumstances over the previous years, Grant and I were no strangers to belittlement from our superiors, so we let that shit roll off our shoulders, for the most part. Yeah, we'd bitch about it, like everyone in a shit job does, but life, for the most part, wasn't bad. We had gotten an apartment together. Well, Grant had gotten it before I got out and let me move in for a share of the bills. It was nothing fancy, but not too bad for a couple of bachelors nearing their 30s. Life sort of fell into a stride for those next few years. We had both moved up a little bit in our place of employment, but with new managers came new condescension. It got old, but nothing we couldn't handle. There had grown a lot of talk around the plant in recent weeks about some special shindig that happened every few years. The Orchard Grand Festival, a big fundraiser kind of thing that corporate would do every couple of years or so. I heard some folks can win a shit ton of money from this thing, one of the older employees told us enthusiastically. Member Joe Rand from Plant 42, Ron the quality clerk, asked the older fella. Nuh-uh. Oh wait, big old grizzly fucker, he asked in return. Yeah, he looked at us. He ain't lying. Fucker was big as a goddamn moose. Big old shit-kicking some bitch. He told us with wide eyes
Ron simply replied, "Lottery from what I hear. Apparently it was just that. Sort of a name drawing between all of the plants. Every employee who had worked for the company for at least a year was eligible to be entered into a drawing, but only 30 people were chosen. Completely random. Could be all from one plant or a couple from all plants." Ron shrugged. "You never know," he said as he strolled off. 2 weeks later, Grant and I were given the news that we had both been selected to attend the event. "What's the catch?" I asked my portly manager after he gave us the news. "No catch," he said, "but you're going to be gone for a week or so," he said dismissively. He handed us a card with the address we had to show up to at 10 o'clock the following Thursday morning. Grant and I just shrugged to each other and went on about our day. Sure, we couldn't help but talk about all the things we could do with that sort of money. Should that part even be true? I suggested moving to the beach and opening a bar. Grant just said, "I couldn't give it to us. As long as I don't have to deal with that bugger anymore," he sneered, pointing at our screaming douche of a manager, sitting smugly in his air-conditioned office while we sweated our nuts off in the plant. The next week dragged like hell. We were both excited and a little apprehensive about what was to come. Grant was far more outgoing than myself, but we were both not big fans of being paraded around in front of onlookers. We couldn't know what this event would entail, mind you. Nobody seemed to know much about it other than it was a series of games that would raise funds for charity. Yeah, there was a chance to win big money, but only for the winner. Whether there were any consolation prizes for second and third, nobody knew, but surely everyone would get something for their time. We were assured, however, that we would be paid for a full 40-hour check for the week away. It was company time, all things considered. There was even talk of some extra vacation days if we made it to the end. However things went, it didn't seem like a no-win situation, at least. Were we to be disqualified early on, we'd still be given the week off and be compensated for our time, according to our grimacing boss. Grant and I theorized everything from silly kids' games to a fight to the death situation. We laughed pretty hard at that one. We spent the next few hours talking shit to each other about how we'd fuck each other up to get to the prize. "Bigger they are, the harder they fall, you wanker," Grant said, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "Fuck you, you scrawny git," I replied in a god-awful attempt at an English accent. Grant spit half of the water out. He just chugged. "What the fuck was that supposed to be?" he chuckled. "Sounded like a bloody Aussie giving birth to a hedgehog." "Got nothing better to do than cut up," our manager yelped, red-faced as he turned the corner. "You two don't get some work done, there will be no festival," he continued, face reddening even more. "Keep this shit up and there will be no more jobs for that matter," he said, almost under his breath as he walked off, in a manner that would suggest he just ate some bad tacos. Grant stood upright and gave his best military salute. I held my breath to attempt to hold back the laughter. That was about how every day went, leading up to the event. We had fun, if nothing else.